Hello, everyone. My name is Mathieu Glaude, and I'm the founder and CEO of Northern Block, a leading global technology provider of self-sovereign identity solutions. Northern Block is proudly Canadian, headquartered in Toronto, Canada. So the title of my presentation today is Lessons from the Frontline, Building Self-Sovereign Solutions for Mid-Tier FinTechs. And the mention of mid-tier FinTechs as a target market will be explained a bit later on in the presentation. But in short, it has to do with the collaborative platform business models that are made possible for FinTechs, which in result will unlock network of network effects, but we'll get to that. I'd like to start the presentation by taking a couple of steps back to explain how we got to self-sovereign solutions. I have a couple stories of being on two distinct frontline experiences that helps explain how I got here. The first is when I started my career at Capital One Bank on the front line of a call center. And then the second one is through my experience of being on the front line of decentralization while running Northern Block for 4 years as a consultancy, really focused on building decentralized solutions that leverage blockchain and other distributed computing mechanisms. So as I just mentioned, early in my career, I spent some time in Capital One call centers. Looking back, this was a significant learning experience, being at the cross-section between the customer and the company. No one at any company has a better understanding of the customer than a frontline customer service agent. So what I realized quickly being in that role was that people would call for the same issues over and over again. Some common reasons were password resets, which I think was about 25% of call volume. People would call to obtain their account balance, call about a lost or stolen card, call to inquire about a credit limit increase, and there were some other reasons why people would call over and over again. So really all of these result in friction for the customer. At no time is having to phone up the call center a fun time for anyone. So any need for a customer to phone up a call center is really a service failure by the company. But that being said, many companies have call volumes still today in the millions of calls annually, and they waste large sums of money authenticating and then attempting to service customers they really don't know much about. So customer service reps don't have much visibility into the customer. They don't have much visibility in reality into previous interactions with the customers. They also don't know much about the customer other than the customer's name or maybe some just high-level account details. And one thing to note here is I did notice on the front line here in the call center that most calls were from existing customers that had already been serviced with some product. They were not prospective customers, but they were existing customers. So looking at the large volume of calls that would come in every day, I started to realize that it would only take some small investments to prevent customer issues from reoccurring. For example, improving some communications, making some small feature updates for better online experiences. But really the business didn't realize the correlation of these specific issues to call volume. So I attempted to come up with a solution here. I started developing a taxonomy of call reasons. I then taught myself how to code so I could build a call logging system for service agents. So I slowly launched this system in one call center, then in a second, and slowly across others until this thing kind of went international. I guess it went pretty well. But all of a sudden, I had all of this data about customers. So what I ended up doing was I got into data science because I had all this data and I had to do something to create value out of the data. So I got my hands dirty into there to try to get in there and create some business cases for the business. So as these business analysis projects matured and I stabilized the whole process, I transitioned into digital products to start building online banking and call center software for the business. This whole experience led me to really see some trends that weren't only true within the bank, but everywhere. So it wasn't hard to notice that cybersecurity risks were on the rise, both for organizations and for people. We were seeing mistrust not only in institutions, but also in companies and different organizations. People were continuously being missegmented, and we honestly still see that happening today, right? If you just look at how people were segmented into different demographics to predict the last elections in the US, you see that it doesn't work anymore. Nowadays, people have access to so much information It's more open and it's more global because of the internet. So every person is unique. Everyone is their own person. So it's tough to segment people together. It doesn't really work anymore. And lastly, disconnects with the voice of the customer. So we perform KYC as organizations, but do we truly know the customer? So I categorize those trends as ones that lead to friction on the left side. And then also around that time, I was starting to gain some exposure to crypto and blockchain companies through Capital One's venture arm. So they were starting to make some investments into blockchain companies. So I started studying it and got really obsessed with the potential of blockchain and decentralization. So I really saw everything going digital. Software was already eating the world up and was starting to eat away at finance. So I saw so many opportunities for blockchain to be used there. One of its main attractions is the promise of bringing more virtuous and trustworthy governance as a result of the more decentralized control of the underlying systems or protocols. So decentralized control has the potential to cause some sort of leveling effect that more fairly distributes value to users. It limits exploitation. It could remove barriers to entry, and it could also increase opportunities for disruptive innovation and value creation. So I bucketed that second group as kind of silos, as decentralization could help get us out of these siloed environments. And the need for privacy, the last trend that's in there. I've said it and I'll say it again. For me, privacy is the killer feature of the 2020s, of the decade that we're in. We're only at the beginning and we're only going to see the importance of privacy keep rising. So that drove me into the world of decentralization, where there's never a dull moment. So that's where my second frontline experience began, on the forefront of decentralization. I founded Northern Block as a technology provider of decentralized solutions. And over the past few years, we've amassed quite a war chest of both technical and strategic knowledge about decentralized business models. We've deployed over 30 different software products, working with Fortune 1000 companies, but also working with entrepreneurs on their startups. We've tokenized just about anything that you could think about tokenizing, and we've developed expertise across many different blockchains and tech stacks. So one key thing we always knew, but it kind of became more evident and more critical as we deployed more ecosystem solutions that leverage blockchain, was we kind of had a holdback when it came to user management. So it was great that we had these decentralized systems, but how did we manage users? How did we onboard users? How do we manage their access rights? How did we manage their compliance? We had no good way of doing it in a decentralized manner that really kept the whole ethos, that whole self-sovereign ethos of why we got into the space. So we got really curious about, how we could solve this problem. So we spent a year in R&D really trying to understand the potential of decentralized identity. And while doing this, I kept being brought back to my customer service days. So if you search for customer experience on Google, it yields close to 700 million results. So it's clearly a hot category, meaning it's one in which a lot of companies sell a lot of products and services to other companies. So the top result in that search is a Wikipedia article on the topic, which begins, and I quote, "In commerce, customer experience is the product of an interaction between an organization and a customer over the duration of their relationship." I end the quote. And so the important pieces that you should make a mental note of here are both the interaction and the relationship. And so the quote continues with this interaction is made up of three parts: the customer journey, the brand touch points, and the environments the customer experiences. So this slide shows a nice way of illustrating the customer journey. But as we thought more about this, there's one big thing this illustration doesn't do very well, and that is conveying the real ratio of both sides of the customer journey. So the real ratio of the buy versus the own side. So our lives are filled with things we already have bought, and we spend 100% of our lives with those things. So this was mostly true as well from the call center experiences, where the large majority of calls were from existing customers, not new leads. So the real ratio is more like this. Now, even the shopaholics among us only buy stuff a small percentage of the time. So if we consider the curb weight of solutions in the world of interactions between companies and customers today, in the buy loop of the customer journey, we have literally all of advertising, which is a trillion annual plus. We have all of CRM, which is tens and tens of billions. And we have all the rest of marketing, which has way too many segments to even bother looking up. So in the own loop, we have trillions of dollars of greenfield opportunities for these two words I had you take a mental note of earlier, these interactions and relationships. So we thought, wouldn't it make full sense for customers to be in charge of their side of these relationships, preferably through means for interaction that customers control themselves? So that vision has led us to create the NB Orbit product suite. So it uses self-sovereign identity, of course, which is really just identity and attribute data that gets funneled through a wallet or an agent that is employed by the user. We use open and standardized frameworks. So we use W3C verifiable credential data models, for example. We use trust over IP's dual governance and tech stack model. And we're currently partaking in the Pan-Canadian Trust Framework alpha testing within the DIAC. So that's quite exciting, and we're excited about that. But all these things allows for the user to obtain verifiable and potentially trusted data from the parties it interacts with and share that data with other parties. So it's truly portable and reusable credentials. So as onboarding happens, people become participants of an orbit or an ecosystem. So you can see here the mobile device that represents a consumer communicating in a peer-to-peer manner with an organization. So they can exchange verifiable credentials, they could use private peer-to-peer chats, they can manage data they want to share or data they don't consent to sharing, and they can manage their personas from the wallet. They could also get verifiable credentials directly from the wallet, such as a government-issued ID, through just scanning their government ID and performing a liveliness test. So we've taken a top-down onboarding approach where we onboard ecosystem admins that create the orbit. They then are able to onboard partner organizations who are able to then onboard their employees, and it keeps cascading down through employees and through customers. So it's a very scalable architecture that enables the network effect to happen pretty quick. So here we're seeing a workflow. So workflows could be customized and could specify the type of verifiable data to ask for in proof requests. So all of these workflows could be directly consumable via APIs. So this is great for an ecosystem developer that may wish to white label a solution, but it's also great for organizations who have developers that wish to integrate this directly into their system. It's very easy to do. And so every authentication and every access function in here is driven by verifiable credentials, which again, makes it very scalable. So this system works very well alongside existing identity and access management systems that an organization may already have implemented. So it's very complementary, and it works phenomenally with decentralized solutions. So we're able to go back to the issue that we had with the existing decentralized solutions we were building, and this solves so many problems for us. So it's fantastic. Now I want to finish this presentation on why all of this matters to us and why we think it's important to the fintechs we're working with now and the ones we're going to work with in the future. So if I go back to our experiences and our lessons learned being on the front line of decentralization, we noticed a trend amongst other leveling technologies, such as communication networks, that first start as decentralized, but then become more centralized over time, with the associated value capture eventually becoming concentrated into a very few large business entities that have higher rates of value extraction. So this historic cyclic behavior is quite well documented, but we've thought about it quite a bit. Now, one could argue that the internet, which started as a great leveler due to its decentralized networking, has now resulted in most of its value being concentrated in a handful of companies that we all know too well. Well, I guess not as well as they know us, but let's leave that one aside. Once centralization occurs, innovation and value creation both decrease, and value extraction increases to the detriment of the average user. So this description is all too well known in the platform, right? We see this happening over and over again with platforms. And if we just take a step back with, asking ourselves the question of what is a platform? The definition of a platform is a type of business model that derives significant, if not primary value from network effects. So examples of platform business models that we all know are Airbnb or Uber. So the primary advantage of a platform business model is that network effects could capture value better than any other type of business model. And again, the most valuable enterprises in the world today rely on network effects and platforms. So in its simplest form, a platform is a network that connects demand side with supply side of products and services. So it connects buyers and sellers. And the primary role of the platform is to foster value transfer by connecting, and by connecting through finding, filtering, and matching. So by connecting participants from both sides of the network and then facilitating transactions between them. And so all of this together reduces friction to achieve a goal, which makes it cheaper and more accessible to do things that you maybe previously wouldn't have done. And so they reduce friction. So how do they reduce friction? To answer that, let's reframe friction as transaction costs. The primary function of a platform business model is to sell reduction in transaction costs. That's it. And then if we break up transaction costs, there are three categories. There's the triangulation, which is another word for connecting, so helping find, filter, and match. There's transfer, which is another word for facilitation, which could include transport, delivery, payment, etc. And trust transaction costs include the costs of ensuring competency, reliability, and honesty in the transaction. So trust transaction costs could also include the costs of maintaining something like privacy and even the alignment of interest between parties. And for many platforms, explicit trust costs include stuff like setting up user accounts with authentication and authorization, while other trust costs may just be hidden. And for transactions of higher value that hold more risk, for example, fintech or financial transactions, the trust costs are always going to be higher. So the important takeaway here is that reducing total transaction costs, so reducing the sum of triangulation, transfer, and trust, is the vital activity of any platform. And these platforms make trade-offs between all these different types of costs to offer the best possible platform to their target customer. And so for FinTechs, who have high trust costs, using something like NB Orbit and using self-sovereign identity and verifiable credentials, they're actually able to not have as many trade-offs as they may have had previously, as there's no need necessarily to really up the spending on the trust if you're inside an ecosystem and collaborating within an orbit or between orbits. So ecosystem solutions could be the answer here for FinTechs. And so portable and verifiable credentials shared between platforms will significantly reduce trust costs. I've gone into depth describing platforms and self-sovereign identity and decentralization to some extent, all in order to make it easier to introduce the concept of a meta platform. And this is where we're going with NB Orbit. So we're enabling fintech ecosystem solution providers to leverage the power of self-sovereign identity and set up their own orbit, aka their own platform, and at the same time, leverage other orbits, aka other platforms, other ecosystems to access credentials and issuers and customers. So NB Orbit enables meta platform formation, which is a platform that enables and fosters participant-controlled value transfer across and among other platforms. And because platforms are a type of network, a meta platform enables network of network effects. And I'll argue that network of network effects are the most valuable kind of network effects, especially for participants on the associated platforms. So each platform participant can move between platforms as they wish with very little friction. By managing one's own digital credentials, there's just tons of opportunities to use the portability and verifiability properties to gain interoperable value unlocking. So there's opportunities for these platforms to cross-sell, to upsell, etc. The possibilities are just endless. And most importantly, this allows for fintech platforms to really compete against the large dominant market players and truly disrupt for the better. So this is the quite exciting direction that we're going in. And as today we took a look back at my lessons learned from both front lines that I described earlier, This model is a complete game changer on both fronts. So to close very quickly, because I know I'm running up against time here, we're just about to launch a beta testing program for MB Orbit. We do have limited participation left, but if you're an ecosystem solution builder or want to learn more about the vision or how you could get involved, I'd love to hear from you. Honestly, collaboration is key to unlocking all this immense value that we're talking about. So there's a need for strong allies and strong partners to achieve the vision here. So please reach out to me. You could find me online. I'm active on Twitter and LinkedIn, or you could just search me online or find our website. Look forward to hearing from you. Thank you.